All right, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for showing up tonight. Great turnout so far. We've had almost 45 people in here, so really great turnout for tonight's lecture. If this is your first time attending the Friends of the Cabildo lecture series, these are free to members. We've got them planned all the way through June, and then we'll pick it back up in August, and we'll be doing about 3 a month. So and it's free to members, so I hope you take advantage of this. If not, there's a small fee, but you can become a member for as little as $40, and you're going to get over the next 12 months, you'll probably get over 30 something lectures that you can attend about new books or new history that's come out, or we might just go back and find some other people that have talked in the past. So I hope that you feel that this really is a great advantage as a member of the Friends of the Cabildo to do this. Just to give you a quick update, next week, I lost my page here. Next week we have Keith Midkiff, who's going to be doing a lecture on the volunteer lines of the Battle of New Orleans. So it's a very interesting topic. The New Orleans volunteer militias at the Line Jackson. So that's next Tuesday at 6 p.m. And then in May, we have 3 lectures, one on white unionists in the Deep South during the Civil War, one with Doug McCash on his new book on Mardi Gras beads, and then Carol Reese doing A. Hayes Town and the architectural image of Louisiana. But tonight's lecture, we have a duo here. We have Emily Ford and Barry Stiefel here, and their new book, The Jews of New Orleans in the Mississippi Delta. When I saw this book came out, I was fascinated with the topic. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, where there was a pretty good collection of Jewish people of Jewish faith, and I had a ton of great Jewish friends, and so when I saw this book, I was like, I need to know more about this topic. It is something that it's a community down here that is really, really strong. And so I look forward to hearing more from these guys talking about their new book, The Jews of New Orleans and the Mississippi Delta. So please welcome Emily Ford and Barry Stiefel. Sorry.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah.
So. Oops. Okay, can everybody see?
Yep, we can.
Cool. Okay. All right, Barry, I'm going to let you kick this off.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. I guess to tell you a little about myself, I'm faculty at the Historic Preservation Community Planning Program at the College of Charleston. However, prior to coming here, I did my PhD in historic preservation at Tulane University, New Orleans. So this is what exposed me to the Jewish community there, a community that I was involved with when I lived there. I lived there from 2004 up till Katrina, and then would come back and visit occasionally with my committee after Katrina until I finished my dissertation in 2008. A number of years later, I met Emily Ford, who was a student in the joint program in historic preservation between the College of Charleston and Clemson University. And she had a passion particularly for cemeteries, and she'll tell you more about that. And in particular, an interest in those cemeteries in New Orleans. And then based on a past experience I had working with the same press on another book in Detroit, they're wondering if I'd be interested in doing a book on the Jewish experience in New Orleans, as well as the greater region. And so I approached Emily Ford to see if she'd be interested in partnering on this. And I was very pleased that she did it. Most of this work is hers, and what she has done is absolutely fantastic. And yes, Emily, please take a chance to introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. So hi, my name's Emily Ford. So at the time this book was written, I was a graduate student at the College of Charleston. Well, at the time, it was a joint program between the College of Charleston and Clemson University in Charleston. But I was a resident of New Orleans, and I really wanted to tailor the program to fit my desire to work in the cemeteries of New Orleans. I wrote my master's thesis on Lafayette Cemetery #1, and the punchline is I now run Lafayette Cemetery #1 as the superintendent of cemeteries for the city of New Orleans. So I think I'm gonna just kind of skip over to how the book came to be, because unless Dr. Stiefel, did you want to continue with I had a little intro slide for you.
Oh.
But
So yeah, this is the previous book I did, the Jewish Community of Metro Detroit. I originally grew up in the Detroit area, and through interest in Jewish history and culture, not only that being the background of my own family, but also having spent time researching various communities around the world. This here in particular is the Jewish cemetery in Prague, which is, I think, perhaps the most renowned Jewish cemetery in the world. A fascinating place, the way they have so many layers of people crammed in there over time.
okay. Oops. I do want to mention there is a cat behind me. I can't do much about him. I apologize if he disrupts our lecture. That's Walter, guys. So when I got approached to do the book by Dr. Stiefel, you know, I was writing my master's thesis in New Orleans, and he sort of approached me. He's like, "Well, you're going to be on the ground," and I was really excited to get to really dive into a very rich topic and a very already pretty well researched. I will say that there are a lot of really great books on on several aspects of Southern Jewish life in Mississippi and Louisiana. However, Dr. Stiefel's sort of approach that he wanted to take for the book was to acknowledge the intercommunication between communities on either side of the Mississippi River, between New Orleans and Vicksburg. We sort of narrowed that down as well because there were a great deal of disparate communities throughout the past 300 years. We narrowed it down by focusing specifically on communities that had purpose-built synagogues. So that's sort of the scope of what we were looking at. But for me, it meant I got to spend a year and a half driving between here and St. Francisville and Port Gibson and Vicksburg. I got to meet a lot of folks I'm still in touch with. And I really got to dig into this topic that we then were sort of tasked with distilling down to 40,000 words. So it was, for a graduate student, really exciting to be able to do this kind of work. It was, I'm really, really proud of this book. And I'm going to go ahead and advance it to the next slide for Dr. Stiefel to kind of lay out how we're going to present tonight.
Okay, well, Emily and I are going to alternate in terms of how we're describing a sampling of sort of content from the book to sort of give you a survey tour of sort of the Jewish experience in New Orleans, and of course branching out into some of the nearby communities. And we'll also show how many of these individuals and places are interconnected between each other, between social and economic relationships. And of course, throughout, we not only try to provide as much visual imagery as possible, but also try to locate things on maps for you so that you can see how these places are positioned spatially.
And I'm going to start. I know I didn't make it as visual as possible, so I'm going to use my cursor. We got these little markers to show where these buildings that we're pointing out are. And I'm going to start uptown on St. Charles Avenue. This is the current residence of the president of Tulane University. It's right on St. Charles and Audubon by the park. And it's a lovely building. It was built in the 1930s. It was built by Sam Zamuri, who was a Jewish Bessarabian immigrant who is best known for having taken, having run United Fruit for a long time. He started as a banana man, as a fruit importer, in New Orleans, as many immigrants did. And his story is truly remarkable. There's a few books that I'm going to recommend as well as we kind of move through this. There are two very good books about Sam Zamuri. One is called The Fish That Ate the Whale, and the other is called Banana Men. And they're both really readable, interesting books about this man who really did start from nothing, and became sort of this sort of larger than life person who took over a giant fruit company. He was also a great philanthropist. There's, I think, a school of anthropology that's named after his daughter at Tulane. But this is just a very visible part of uptown that really has its roots in early 20th century Jewish history in New Orleans. And I'm gonna advance the slide.
So this is the United Fruit headquarters on St. Charles Avenue near Poydras in the Central Business District. And this, of course, that was the headquarters starting at this time. And architecturally speaking, an amazing place, particularly looking at this door surround, this sort of Beaux-Arts Rococo ornamentation. Zamuri moved to New Orleans in 1905 and operated with his partner out of an office on Camp Street before this. It's important to note that the political power of fruit companies in Honduras and other Central American countries at the turn of the century and into the 1930s was the result of stakeholders' attempts to influence taxes and labor organizations, and on occasion, they installed their own governments which favored their profits. Zamuri's fruit company, as well as other colleagues of his, all participated in the political coups and economic manipulation, what was known as the Banana Republics. Zamuri, in particular, as president of the fruit company, supported the overthrow of the Honduran government and the ascension of Manuel Bonilla to the presidency, which would lead to tax breaks and, of course, favors for his companies as well as his colleagues. And Zamuri was ever a clever industrialist and continued to grow his company throughout the early 20th century. Towards the end, he sold the company and bought a large ornate house, as you saw before. Nicknamed Sam the Banana Man, he acquired a vast amount of wealth. He was given over 300,000 shares of the United Fruit Company. So there it is, a fantastic example of some of the material culture left by these businessmen in New Orleans.
I can't resist this one picture that we included. We got to include this one in the book thanks to Kathy Can, who's the former archivist at Tureau Infirmary. This is the only picture I could find of him smiling, and I adore this photo. And I asked Kathy, I was like, "Is there any way? Do you know where I could get rights to get this photograph?" And she just picked up the phone and called somebody who I still don't know who she called, but she said, "There's this nice girl here. Can she use that picture of Uncle Sam?" And that's how we got to include this photograph of him, which I'm really lucky that I got to meet Kathy Can. She is a remarkable lady. Moving downtown. This is one of the more remarkable landmarks associated with Louisiana and New Orleans Jewish history is something that a lot of folks would not expect. Judah P. Benjamin, who was a Charleston native, lived here and was the Secretary of State and alternately the Secretary of War of the Confederacy, lived on Bourbon Street. And this is a photograph of his house taken at the time of the publication of the book. And at that time, it was Temptations Gentlemen's Club, which I think Temptations has since closed. But from what I learned in researching the book, this building obviously retains some integrity on the exterior. What I also understood was that it retains some features on the interior as well. I heard that the VIP room was the old dining room and still has left on it. I took 3 days to get into this place. I could not manage to do it. But it is a remarkable building, still there. It's, I think, 1805 construction. I'll also take the opportunity to mention that the Museum of Southern Jewish Life, which we'll get into at the end of the presentation as well, on the 24th, they will be having a virtual presentation, a virtual lecture on Judah Benjamin, and he as a complex figure of Jewish history in the South, being a Confederate and a Confederate statesman at that. So I definitely want to recommend. It's a virtual presentation. It's on the 24th, I think, at 5, and I'll have a link to that at the end of the presentation as well.
And this here is Judah P. Benjamin's plantation, Bell at Chase. Unfortunately, it is no longer around. However, the plantation bell still remains by the school there. And Bell at Chase was built after Benjamin achieved a certain amount of political and economic success. And this is in, I'm going to butcher this, Palenque's Parish. And this is also where he went to much younger Natalie. Though their relationship was often distant, there's actually an interesting biography that just came out a year or so ago on Judah P. Benjamin by Yale University Press. And there's some suspicions that he may have been gay. So it's a complicated situation. He only spent a limited amount of time here. Benjamin spent a lot of time in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, as well as later on in Washington, D.C. and in Richmond, the various capitals. And of course, after the end of the Civil War, never to return, fleeing off to Canada and eventually France.
And the Plaquemines Parish.
Yeah, okay, okay.
So moving uptown from the quarter, obviously Canal Street, for folks who live in the city and grew up in the city, some of the landmarks associated with the Jewish community, especially in New Orleans, are going to be associated with Canal Street. They're going to be department stores. Rubenstein's is still on Canal Street. Meyer the Hatter is still on Canal Street. This building, which is the modern building, is here on the left. This is a photograph of it from 1940s when it was Godshaw's department store, owned by Leon Godshaw, who was an Alsatian Jewish immigrant who came to Louisiana as a peddler, as a lot of Jewish immigrants did in the 1840s, 1850s. He worked as a peddler until after the Civil War, at which point he obtained several plantations for sugar, which we'll get into as we move upriver to Reserve. But he also opens Godshaw's department store, which I think now and then I get to run into somebody who still remembers shopping at Godshaw's. Unfortunately, the building still remains to remind us. Oop.
All right. The synagogues of New Orleans are probably the most prevalent mark on the landscape in the area, and there are numerous historic synagogues around. And the dynamism among the multiple nationalities that made up the Jewish congregations in late 19th century New Orleans prompted the development of this diversity of synagogues. Here we have Beth Israel, a congregation founded in 1904. We also have others such as Temei Derech, an Eastern European congregation that was near Drydas Street. And it was formed in 1857. And these congregations would also go through various mergers as they sort of grew and expanded and changed. 1924, mansion on Carondelet Street was demolished, and a new building was built here designed by architect Emile Veal, a Jewish architect. And this is what we see at Beth Israel. We also have, not too far away from there, Anshe Sfard Synagogue. The building's white. I don't think we have a picture of it here, but it's another one with an amazing picture, particularly an interior. Anshe Sfard was the congregation I was involved with when I lived in New Orleans. Like other Jewish houses of worship designed by Will, which is both Beth Israel and Anshe Sfard. The apex of the building is adorned with Hebrew inscriptions. Though Beth Israel, like other congregations located to the suburbs, latter half of the 20th century. Its building near Carondelet and Terrace Shore Street still remains, as you see right here, both on the map and a picture of the facade.
We're going to be sort of like marching upriver from here on out. So I'm really glad I got this slide. So this really lovely building is the first Gates of Prayer synagogue. We're actually going to go through 3 of them as we move uptown. This is the first, and it is on Jackson Avenue near Constant Street. So for folks who are from the city, they know this area as being, there's a lot of churches there. There's the German Protestants across the street. St. Alphonsus, St. Mary's Assumption was over in that area as well. Notre Dame was on that street. This building, which was finished in 1867, is part of this area of town that I think is, especially Jackson Avenue, is really remarkable because you have this opportunity to sort of imagine what the riverfront was like in this like community of all, the civic centers up and down the street, but also it's juxtaposed with the modern, especially at the end of Jackson Avenue with the port and the defunct ferry terminal. So I think that this building, once what we, obviously with having gorgeous brickwork and being an important building on its own, also sort of retains this like civic context that I think is really special. At the time that the book was published, this building was vacant. It has since been renovated and is now it's now lofts, like luxury rentals. And but for anybody who's in the area and you walk past it, it does still retain the Hebrew inscription above the door in really delicate paint. And it's really a remarkable building.
This is the second Gates of Prayer near Napoleon and Coliseum Streets in Uptown. And the movement of established Jews to Uptown continued into the 20th century, such as with the synagogue that you see here, until about the 1970s or so, when Jews started moving out to the suburbs, particularly Metairie, where many congregations are found today.
And this is the present day, which at the point, there's a little star over there by the causeway. The current synagogue building, Gates of Prayer in Metairie. It was built in 1975. It's really a very cool modern building. Something else that's really I think significant about what I think about this building when I see it too is especially at the time that we were writing the book. Beth Israel's synagogue, which was on Canal Boulevard, was destroyed in Katrina, and the congregation had relocated. And I know that there was a time that they were sharing the space with the Gates of Prayer was sharing the space with Beth Israel. Since the book was published, I do believe Beth Israel opened a new building like quite close to the Gates of Prayer building, which is really, we get to do these little updates as the publication of the book. And that's a one that I'm really glad to share. And I think we're leaving New Orleans now. We're not, sorry.
No, well, we got a little bit more. All right. So this was Temple Sinai. It was the first Reformed congregation that was formed in New Orleans. This is about in 1871. And this is the building that was on Tivoli Street near Lee Circle. Unfortunately, this building was demolished in the 1960s. Among the people present at the where this congregation was founded were Julius Weiss, Leon Godshaw, Isidore Newman, and Michael Frank. Frank was elected the congregation's first president, and by 1871, the construction firm of Little and Middle Miss was at work building this Temple Sinai. It's also worth noting that the location of this building was closer to the homes of the congregation's more affluent members. The temple that you see here was finished in 1872. It's impressively large and ornate, which expresses the wealth and status of the congregation's members. And it was featured with twin Byzantine towers on each of its primary facade that could be seen from far away. This would be an important feature that will come up later. The temple itself, however, was demolished in the 1960s, but the towers were salvaged and mounted on a residential building at Canal Street near Montalini Square.
Um, so this is the current Temple Sinai building, which was also designed by Emil Weil. And it was finished, I think, in the 30s. It's for anybody who's been uptown, you know this building. But you also know that this building looks remotely like another building, which is Toro Synagogue, which is a little bit farther downtown on St. Charles. Both of them were designed by Emil Weil. And they are, really remarkable pieces. Weil was a really accomplished architect. And I'm going to just, because I put these in a little bit of an odd order, I'm just going to remind everybody that Dr. Stiefel just mentioned that Temple Sinai's towers were salvaged, and they are still visible in the city.
And there they are. Yeah, and they were collected by architectural collector with I guess great foresight, and placed at the top of this house near the cemeteries, near the square. Sort of unusual, but there you go. Very innovative in terms of recycling. Wish they could have done more with the building before.
It overlooks one of the sort of amalgamated Jewish cemeteries as well, which is over by, if anybody goes to the mortuary for Halloween, which is on the other side of the cemetery. This is the location of the cemetery, the building, and the Halloween haunted house. So now we get to move upriver. So moving up to Reserve, Laplace area. So this was really Leon Godshaw's, this was his community. Like, he had the department store downtown in New Orleans, but after the Civil War, Leon Godshaw bought like 14, or acquired, both bought and acquired, 14 different individual sugar plantations, which he consolidated. And this also included, and created Godshaw Sugars, which a lot of folks might be familiar with, in order to sort of take this sort of agrarian model and turn it into sort of industrial farming. One of the interesting innovations that he did was he built a narrow gauge railroad between all of these properties. And if anybody's driven down the River Road near Reserve, there still is one of these little engines of his narrow gauge railroad that he operated. The giant American sugar refinery was his property as well. And he was a philanthropist, specifically in the town of Reserve, which was where he lived. There was a school there. Well, at the time of the publication of our book, the Leon Godshaw School was on River Road, actually quite near the little railroad exhibit, and that is the Leon Godshaw School, visible up here in the upper right. And this is also it.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Godshaw School collapsed due to neglect in March 2021, so just over a year ago. And this is the remaining parts afterwards were unfortunately demolished. So just an example, particularly since both Emily and I are preservationists, that we have to maintain constant vigilance over unused historic buildings, other properties, to ensure that their continuation endures. Fortunately, this was not the case in this instance.
Yeah, it's really sad. Further upriver to Donaldsonville, which I have to say, this was one of my favorite places to be to research during putting the book together. Donaldsonville has so much rich Jewish history, so many like sort of little quirks to it, and so many folks who are still there who are working to preserve this heritage, that I just I feel really privileged to have gotten to do research in Donaldsonville. So one of the more prominent members of the Jewish community in Donaldsonville was Alfred Lemon, who arrived in Donaldsonville in the 1850s, where he married a Catholic woman, Marie Berthelot, who converted actually in New York. Her the documents of her conversion are at Tulane, and they're in Hebrew. Lemon actually kept most of his books in Hebrew. He was just really a remarkable guy. He built the Lemon Block, which is visible over here on the right. I do believe it's a museum now. It's the synagogue in Donaldsonville, which was built in the 1870s, like the early 1870s, is also still present in Donaldsonville. The congregation did disband. I'm pretty sure they disbanded because they sort of joined the congregations in Baton Rouge in the 1920s. But the synagogue building is still there, and it is here on the lower left. It is an Ace Hardware. It's been retrofitted into a hardware store. But the actual original building is still quite visible. And the folks there were kind enough to let me kind of look around and see some of, like, especially like the roof trusses, things like that are original. The 140-year-old Ace Hardware. There's also, for anybody who visits Donaldsonville, there's still a really remarkable little cemetery, the Jewish cemetery in Donaldsonville, which was cared for a long time by a gentleman named Gaston Hirsch, who passed away, I think, in 2005. And at the time of our writing, there was another person who had sort of taken over the care of it, but I do think he has since passed away. But the cemetery has always had this steward in this little tiny town. It's a really lovely space. There's a lot of heritage left in the built environment in Donaldsonville.
All right. Moving on to Baton Rouge. This is a location of one of the most stunning architectural pieces created by a Jewish firm. The Louisiana State Capitol was designed by New Orleans architectural firm Weiss, Dreyfus, and Serfus, and was completed in 1932. The firm would go on to design numerous buildings across Louisiana, including the Governor's Mansion in Baton Rouge, a Jung Hotel and Charity Hospital in New Orleans, Eola Hotel in Natchez, as well as administrative building serving New Orleans' Huey Long Bridge. The Capitol building remains the high achievement of the firm. It's also the tallest state capitol building in the United States and bears some handsome carvings from its steps to its apex in terms of the architectural detail that was there. We also have another Godshaw building, of course, and also showing the city's B'nai Israel Synagogue, both the old and the new one, where I believe this congregation was founded in the 1880s. This older building on the right was a very interesting Greek Revival, Gothic Revival hybrid chapel that was converted for Jewish use. And then later on, on the periphery of Baton Rouge, we have the new building that is currently used today.
Continuing our journey upriver, I'm glad I get the St. Francisville slide. St. Francisville really has for such a St. Francisville is for those who've visited. It's it's a small town. It is a remarkably charming town, and it actually has a great deal of Jewish history. Julius Freed, who was sort of a prominent member of the community, was a benefactor, built a school, which I have here is the Julius Freed School. But there's also, because this was a river community, there was just a great deal of commercial activity, both in St. Francisville and in Bayou Sara, which was the town sort of down the bluff, actually at the river. The ISJL photo, which is just great, of Max Mann's Saloon, which was in Bayou Sara. Like a lot of the towns that we're going to be speaking about as we move up river, Bayou Sara is no longer there anymore due to movement of the Mississippi River before up to 1927, before the river was sort of tamed. But remaining St. Francisville is, of course, the Free and School. Also Temple Sinai Synagogue, which was recently renovated. It was being renovated at the time of the publication of the book. I don't believe that the towers were reconstructed, but the interior has been very beautifully restored. And I'm going to let Dr. Stiefel kind of pick up from there as to what's going on. So,
Yep. This building, this is the school. It dates from about 1908, replacing a previous one that was lost by fire the year before, and served as this community's education building for approximately another 40 years afterwards. And here we have a picture of alumni of that school who advocated for its preservation. And this is part of the National Trust's program called This Place Matters. And this is where, you know, people hold sign holding up why this place matters to them, and sort of get up on a soapbox arguing for why it's important and should be maintained into the future.
And I do want to just kind of add, the Freehan Foundation does continue to do fundraising to convert the school and the synagogue into a museum. So anybody who's interested in supporting their mission, the Freehan Foundation, I believe it's freehanfoundation.com. Spelled like Freehan, but pronounced Freehan. Moving up Woodville, Woodville, Mississippi. So now we get to go into Mississippi. There was a pretty small community in Woodville. The congregation Beth Israel constructed this really lovely synagogue in 1872, I believe. And it's a wood frame building. It was colorful. It had towers on either side of it. And it was functional for about 40 years until the 1920s when the congregation dissolved. At that point, the building was converted into a movie theater, which this Library of Congress image is really great. If I could zoom in, you'd see that on these signs, it actually advertises that the building is air conditioned. I think this photograph was taken in like 1925. But unfortunately it did burn in a fire in 1930. All that really remains of the Jewish community in Woodville is this lovely little cemetery, which is outside of Woodville. And it's just I don't think it's on 61. It's sort of off of 61. It's this very tiny little lovely cemetery, and somebody local has been taking care of it for about a decade. It continues to be lovingly cared for by somebody, but it just sort of remains as this really lovely pastoral reminder, and like along Highway 61 of this community that has that was once a really important part of Woodville.
This is looking at Natchez, Mississippi, which had a large and remarkable Jewish population, including the colorful Mayer family, the Beekmans, the Haas family, among others. Section of Natchez City Cemetery also belonged to Congregation B'nai Israel. Remarkable synagogue B'nai Israel was built in 1905, and with its population declining to less than a dozen, the congregation partnered with the Institute of Southern Jewish Life to develop the space as a venue and a museum commemorating Southern Jewish life. And it's really considered one of the gem synagogues that's in the smaller towns of the Mississippi Delta area, and was copied by other congregations elsewhere afterwards. And of course, we also see the tombstones of a very ornate, beautiful historic cemetery that can also be found in Natchez associated with the congregation.
Onward to Port Gibson. Port Gibson is another one. It's similar to, well, if Bayou Sarah no longer exists because the river kind of moved into it, Port Gibson does exist, but lost its relevance because the river moved away from it. I think about 3 miles away. But in the mid 19th century, Port Gibson was a very was a large trading community, a riverboat community. which had a significant, for anybody who's visited, it actually still does have a lovely commercial corridor, and it had like a pretty large like Jewish community that mostly operated in retail. There's the Frischman shoe store, which still remains on the main drag of Port Gibson. But really, the thing that we're all just so fortunate that it has continued to survive is the synagogue building of Gemilith Hased in Port Gibson, which although you guys can probably see that this is the synagogue. It's got these really amazing onion downs, and it actually remains intact. But it's next to a gas station now off of 61, I'm pretty sure. So I just included this lovely historic photo of it, but it's one of a kind. And it actually is sort of still used as a religious building, at least at the time of the publication of the book.
Right, moving on to Vicksburg, may have been the first town among those discussed to establish regular services for its Jewish community. There were roughly 25 Jewish families in Vicksburg by 1840. And although they worshiped in private homes at this time, they were organized and led by a dedicated man who eventually made room in his building on Levy Street for the purposes of holding services. Bernard Yost, sometimes called Bernard Yost, was born in Charlesville, France in 1805, and he was living in Vicksburg by 1840 and developed wealth in real estate. He also acted as a spiritual leader for the Jews of Vicksburg during these early decades, though he was not a trained rabbi. Establishing a place of worship, however, informal, was a large step for the Jewish community in the city and took a while to happen. And eventually they built this synagogue that you see here, called Anshe Chesed. And unfortunately it closed down, and they built a new facility out towards the edge of town. The new one on top was built in 1969. However, less than a dozen congregants or so remain, and there's been recent arrangements for the cemetery near the for Anshe Chesed Cemetery to be part of the National Park Service because it's near the battlefield site. And then in the lower center, we see Philip Sartoris with his wife. He was a Civil War veteran who fought at the Siege of Vicksburg. And it's just sort of an interesting sort of personal life example of the Jewish community that lived in these towns, and you know, that their presence was there, and that, you know, that they were, as we would say in Yiddish, they were mensch.
Oh yes, so I said that I would get back to this. So one of the biggest developments since the publication of the book was the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, which was once, it's been in Utica, Mississippi for a very long time, relocated to New Orleans, and is now located on Howard Avenue in the CBD. And it opened in 2021. So I haven't had the good fortune to go yet. I'm planning to go now with a friend of mine. And like I said, they actually do you know, there's a presentation through MSJE on Judah Benjamin on April 24th. MSJE.org is their website. For anybody local, you know, if you want to learn more about this, the ISJL helped us out enormously in the researching of our book. They are the clearinghouse and the steward for so much of like ephemera, Torah. They have attended, like, one of the part of their mission is to take Torah from congregations that are closing up and you know, issuing them to new congregations. They are a steward of the Southern Jewish community of the highest order. You know, please visit them, please support them. It's really exciting that they're in New Orleans.
Right, yeah, and then that's it. And here we have just closing off with a map that we found from the 1920s, 1930s. It was a bilingual road map in English and Yiddish. And here we have Louisiana with Louisiana spelled in Yiddish, yeah, as well as Baton Rouge. I guess we're happy to entertain some questions if there are
Thank
any.
you guys so much.
Thank you for having us.
That was really fascinating, and really to see all these Jewish populations popped up in all these different towns all over the Louisiana region. It's really fascinating, and actually makes you kind of really even very proud of that the museum is here and is able to document that. Let's see, we have a couple questions, and if you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll ask Emily and Barry. First one's from Tamara Carboni. She says, "Do you know the significance of the hands depicted on the tombstone in Natchez?"
Yes, that is the hand sign for the blessing of the Kohanim, the priestly caste within Judaism. And that is a symbol that they often do when they bless the congregation, particularly around high holidays or particular important Tovim. And you often find that as a demarcation on the gravestones of descendants, members of the Kohanim caste.
Oh. All right, let's see. Suzanne Stone says, do you know anything about the Star of David in the building at 517 to 531 Toulouse, sometimes known as the Haspel Brothers Factory? The Debal survey shows a large number of Jewish owners around the 1870s, including Leon Gottschalk.
Toulouse, what's the address?
517 to 531 Toulouse, the Haspel Brothers Factory.
I don't. I'm trying to because I'm imagining that's like sort of like on the edge of the border, like Toulouse and what, Rampart?
Yeah, would be, I think the 500 block would be closer to Decatur Street. Actually, I thought it would be.
Okay, so it would be on Decatur. Okay, because I was going to say, like, one of the things that there was so much, again, we had to kind of take 300 years of history and kind of distill it into 40,000 words. In terms of like businesses, we did have to pick and choose. But one of the things that I think I got to touch on a little bit was the fact that on charters, like on upper charters, there was sort of like, for a period of time in the late 19th century, there was sort of like this district of Jewish printers. I don't know specifically about that building, but there have been these sort of like collections of buildings, although I would say the Dryads neighborhood, which is farther uptown, is really the only like sort of definitive like retail district that was almost entirely owned by the Jewish community. That was a little bit later, but that specific building I'm not familiar with.
We'll have to do some research on it. Good question, though. Suzanne also says she does it. Well, I knew she did. She does a Jewish New Orleans tour, and she always recommends you guys book. So there you go. You got a fan there. Kyron Pittman says, "Where can we find that?" Oh, you're good. Where can we find that visual of the map at the end? Is it in public domain?
It is.
I think
at the college. Yeah, it's at the College of Charleston Special Collections Jewish Heritage Collection. I think it's in the Rosenthal collection specifically. I don't know if it's been digitized or not, but if we could easily arrange that to have happen. The thing, what you see here is a close-up just of Louisiana. It has the entire lower 48 plus southern Canada and the northern strip of Mexico. So it's a big map, and we just put it in a little segment of what you see there.
Oh, good. All right. Well, we have to do some research at the College of Charleston Library then. Ellen Byron says, "What was the relationship between the Jewish community and other cultures in New Orleans in the past?"
Are we referring to the Cajuns, the Creoles, free people of color, indigenous people? And I am not aware of there being much relationship with the indigenous peoples, but related to the Creoles, as well as both the Creoles, Cajuns, and white Southerners that settled in the area. Jews are often involved in mercantilism, running the dry goods stores. And so they're often the peddlers and the shopkeepers in around the towns who are visiting the towns, selling them goods. And so they were often sort of that sort of middle person that connected commerce, news, and other information between New Orleans with the other smaller communities around the Delta area. And of course, the Jewish communities in New Orleans had contacts with the rest of the country and other parts of the Atlantic world, New York, Boston, the Caribbean, etc. There wasn't much. There's only a small instances of Jews in French and Spanish colonial Louisiana, particularly because of both the Code Noir as well as the Alhambra decree, even though it dated from 1492, when it became Spanish, it applied. So that there are instances of Jews being expelled from there. So that's how we know that they're there, is because they were kicked out. The Jewish presence that doesn't become of consequence until after the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. And even then, it takes a couple decades for any congregation to come. You don't see any congregations until the 1820s.
Mm-hmm.
The next question, Peggy Scott Laborg asked, and I thought about this question as well, so I'm going to piggyback on top of her question. She said, where were the immigrants originally from? And I didn't. What let me follow up on that one was when there were a large population of Jewish people that were, let's say, in Donaldsonville or Natchez, which are these, were they? Did they just randomly migrate from other parts in the northern part of the U.S. or from from Europe, or were they just randomly landing in these locations as well? Was there a community from, let's say Poland or something like that would land in this city?
Yes and yes. I would say there's multiple waves and occurring simultaneously. The first Jewish settlers to arrive sort of circa 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase, and actually had some showing up on sort of the doorstep like shortly before, sort of anticipating this transference. And one in particular is Judah Torah, who showed up there a couple of years beforehand. And I'm actually doing more research on this. It's a very interesting history, but more on that later. So the first ones were, of course, from what is now the northeastern east coast of the United States, where we had Jewish communities. And then they get established as sort of something people of the bulkhead, but you can't really think of Jewish life as being very substantial at this time. And then you have others who are involved with mercantilism and trade, who are first just temporarily here. And then, of course, their presence becomes more permanent. Of course, not only from the East Coast of the United States, but also those who are already doing trade throughout the Caribbean, as well as with Europe. And then where things really seem to pick up is in the 1840s, particularly due to circumstances in Europe with the revolutions that are spreading across Europe at this time, the revolutions of 1848 in particular. And so you have various Jews coming from Central and parts of Western, as well as little bits of Eastern Europe, arriving here. And they're staying pretty much in their own sort of language-based communities. So bulk of them are German speaking, and they're primarily staying in New Orleans. An interesting trend, this is another paper, I could share it some other time. It actually compares the experience of Jewish settlement in Louisiana with the experience of Jewish settlement in Quebec, in terms of the parallels and similarities of these Francophone environments. And what you had as a common sort of phenomenon here in Louisiana and the smaller communities is that the first two, most of the time, there's some exceptions, but most of the time, the first Jews to establish themselves in these smaller communities outside of New Orleans after the Jewish community in New Orleans is sort of there are immigrants from Alsace-Lorraine, who just so happen to speak French. And so they have a slight advantage when it comes to interacting with their neighbors there, because they already speak the language compared to only being knowledge in English or in German. And then around them sort of builds a node of other Jewish immigrants who speak with each other, because the Alsatians also know Yiddish. And so they're also communicating with their Jewish co-religious as these communities are forming. And then eventually the area becomes predominantly English speaking, and sort of opens that up to more immigrants coming from Eastern Europe, Poland, Austria, Romania, when we see more immigrants settling there in the late 19th, early 20th century during the Great Migrations that was occurring during that time period. And during that time period, the Jews are coming to this area, not only by way of New York with Ellis Island, but also the other entry point, if you see on the lower left-hand side of the map, through Galveston. That was another port of entry for many immigrants to the United States.
Very interesting. Emily, you won't surprise one of our tour guide class leaders and tour guide, Charles Goldberg, says the star is on Wilkerson Way, which backs up, the former Ralph and Cacoo's is on both sides, that and Toulouse Street. So I think that's what Suzanne was asking about. And so the next time you guys are driving down there, take a look on Wilkinson and see that. That's very interesting. Brad asked, what was the historical relationship between the Jewish community in New Orleans and the international Zionist movement?
You had members involved with the ZOA, the Zionist Organization of America, and some of the congregations, during the early and middle 20th century, of course, were Zionists. It really depended on the interests of that particular congregation or a particular individual, because there were some congregations, particular reforms that were opposed to Zionism. And so it really depended on the congregation as well as the individual in terms of what their preference was.
All right, we have time for one more question. And Sandra Stimson says, did you hear anything about the Gottschalk chess player who was in France during the Civil War? Maybe any relation?
I know Gottschalk was a very common surname for Alsatians, particularly Jews. You find them in Louisiana, but in other parts too. And I don't know if anyone has done the trouble to put together a comprehensive family tree and just exactly how many families there are.
Great. All right. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. We will send you a link to how to purchase the book tomorrow. We'll obviously send a recording for everybody who's not on here and who's watching it over the next 30 days. So I want to thank Emily and Barry so much. This is an absolutely fascinating topic. I'm sure we could go on for a lot longer. So when you guys come up with something new as well, we'd love to have you guys back as well. And obviously go see the museum. That is a neat, we've had a speaker from there as well to our tour guide class, and it really is a very, very interesting place. So I want to thank everybody for participating tonight, and I want to thank Emily and Barry again. And we hope to see you next Tuesday night at 6 o'clock talking about the Battle of New Orleans. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Yeah, thank you for having us.